All right, I am recording, so good afternoon. This is Jeff Scott for the Day 62 of our Rankin Technical College online AWD1115 database-driven website development 2 class. Today we're going to go over chapter. Hello, Grant. I just started taping. I don't know your girlfriend, but that said, I don't think I caught it from her, but I do have bronchitis. All right. But I know you said that she had it. Yep. Well, I'm going in to see the doctor again tomorrow. So,
All right, good.
all right. So we're going to go over chapter 16 today, as long as I can keep talking. I lost my voice this morning with first class after 2 hours, so we'll see if I can at least go that long today. All right, so we're going to go over chapter 16, and when we're done, we're going to go over exercise 16.1 at the end of the chapter. That is a very interesting exercise because I'm going to ask you to check your stuff when we get to that point. But one of the folders that they talked about in that problem, I didn't have. So I had to just contact Evan, and he was good enough to get back to me very quickly and give me a copy from him. So it was interesting. So the plan is today we're going to go over chapter 16 and exercise 16.1. Then tomorrow we're going to go over the problem at the end of chapter 16 for our not the case study, but the other things that we were working on. All right, we're going to work on that. Then we're going to go back to our project on Wednesday. That's the plan. All right, so with that said, let's just get started. There we are. Okay, so I am on page 647, how to authorize and authenticate users. All right. In this chapter, really up until this point, in this bookstore app, we've done no authentication and authorization. In other words, any user could come in, and not only could any user come in and buy a book or put one in a cart without logging in, they could actually perform admin operations without logging in. Well, that'll change in this chapter. As it says, the chapter will show how to restrict access to some pages so only authorized users can use these pages. Plus, they're going to talk about the ASP.NET identity. So one of the things we're going to have to do is we're going to have to go in and make changes to our context file. All right, we'll talk about that in a little bit. As mentioned here, there's 3 types of authentication. We'll go over all of them. We'll get started with identity. We'll register a user, log in a user, work with roles, and then talk about a few other things like changing passwords and adding additional registration fields. The author does mention in here that it is a fairly complex chapter and a fairly long chapter, but there are still things with authorization and authorization and authentication that are not discussed in this chapter. All right. So as it says, if you want to limit access, you use authentication. You know this to verify a user's identity. You know, when you go into something like when you go into GitHub or even when you log into Rankin, you know, I have to go in and I have to give my login and my password every morning. And then once I'm authenticated, all right, then it looks through the authorization to see what I can and cannot do. All right. So there's 3 types. The first type really, in my opinion at least, it's almost no authentication at all. In other words, it's Windows based, which says if you're logged into your Windows account, you can basically do whatever. And they mentioned in there that works fine for like an intranet app, but you know, it probably wouldn't cut it for a real life app. Second, the one that they discuss in the chapter is individual user account authentication. All right, and that's the one we're going to concentrate on in here. In recent years, as they've mentioned, you know, maybe you've had this before where you go out to use some kind of app or you download a new app or whatever, And rather than asking you to log in or whatever, to create a login, they'll ask if you want to continue with Google or with Facebook. All right, as it says, that's becoming more popular, but it can involve a lot more code behind the scenes, so it's not discussed in the text. All right, so here are the three. I'm not going to sit and read any more in here than I have to. Again, Windows is probably the most generic that's in there and the easiest to use. But the one we're going to concentrate on again is going to be the individual user account authentication, whereas it says we will end up creating a login page with a username and a password. When you create that, you can make that as simple or as complex as you want to or need to. In other words, I believe the one they have us do in this chapter is you put in a first name and a last name and an email or something like that. But you can have, close to a dozen different fields if you want to on that. All right. So by now, people should be able to differentiate between authentication, as it says, validating the user's identity, and authentication. In other words, what do you have access to? All right. So there's actually a really good picture here that goes over how all this stuff works. And this is on page 651 in the book. All right. And the author mentions, he says, to help you understand this, this shows the typical series of exchanges that occur between a web browser and a user who attempts to access a page. All right. Step one, as it says there, it begins when the user requests the page. All right. So the server looks at that and says, hey, basically, is there an authentication cookie for this user? If there is, it'll basically give them what they want. If there is not, the server will redirect them so that they have to log in. And they're assuming here in step 3, that's what happened. So as it says, the browser receives the redirect and requests the login page, and then goes through all that whole process. So as it mentions there, then the whole thing basically can happen. So at the login page, the user enters his or her username and password, posts it back to the server. Then if the server finds the username password in its database and they're valid, all right, the server creates an authentication cookie, redirects the browser back to the original page. So they get to be where they started from originally. And as you probably have seen also either in here or in other applications, sometimes too, what you end up doing is that, rather than making the user log in, or I'm sorry, register every time, all right, there'll be a way to bypass this where you can just say, hey, click here to log in type of thing. All right. By default, it says the user sends the authentication cookie as a session cookie. All right. However, the user can often specify that it be persistent, meaning that it will persist among different sessions. So these are the steps that are right here. I don't think I missed anything. You can take a quick look at it. All right. But I think we have pretty much everything in here. We've gone through the process now or looked at it. All right. Now, in order to do this and go through all this stuff, there's going to be some changes that we have to make, such as in just a couple minutes, we'll go in and we can go in and we can take a look. In fact, we'll do this at the end of the chapter. All right. And we will change where we've got DB context. We will change that in our context file to identity DB context. All right. And then you'll have to also go in and make a change in the on model creating. After doing that, we'll have to run another migration and another update database. And what that'll do is it'll add these tables that you see on the next page here. All right, right here. All right. I'm sorry about that. All right. So as they mention here, all right, it says in older versions, it was a lot more of a pain in the butt because I know I've gone through that. You worked with some I don't know, you wouldn't call them tutorials, but I guess kind of walkthroughs, but they didn't always work as they were supposed to. All right. So it says there right in the middle to start, says you can use it with all of the ASP.NET frameworks. Well, we're using MVC and that's what we'd want. All right. So they mention again some of the major classes that you're going to use in here, and hopefully at least most of these, when you just look at the name, they'll make sense. Again, we will be replacing DB context with identity DB context. You will notice once we get in here, we will get a bunch of tables that will be created for us. Tables like a user table, all right, which will have literally just that. A roles table, which will say this user has this role associated with him or her or them. There are manager classes, as it says, to work with users, to work with roles, etc. And there's a sign-in manager and an identity result. All right. So again, when you come in here and you look at this, you'll notice again, yes, it does support the Facebook, etc., but there's more work that you have to do. And it's based on what's referred to as OWIN, the Open Web Interface for .NET. All right. One thing that Microsoft has done over the years, they used to be a lot more like Apple in that they used to be very closed architecture. They wouldn't want to share anything. But really, as time goes on, I think much more than Apple, they do a pretty good job of sharing different things, and you can actually go in and take a look at it if you want to. All right. So as it says, roles that you apply, access roles to a group of users. So the reason that that's important, not so much in our class, but imagine that we were working on a project together and there were maybe even hundreds of us. We could take everybody who was in a certain group and just create one role and give that role to everybody in the group, as opposed to having to create it for each individual user. All right. As far as restricting access to controllers and actions, some of this stuff you've already seen. So if we turn the page here, the allow anonymous basically is what you get by default. That's what we've used thus far. All right. But when you think about it, even for like the bookstore app, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Really, about the only time that allow anonymous makes sense, as they show in here, all right, is if you're basically going to do a list type of thing. All right. So if you want to show a user a whole bunch of, all the books that you have or all the balls that you're selling or whatever, it makes sense then to leave it off or to set it to allow anonymous. All right. But once there's something where there's going to be a transaction that's going to take place, you'll want to set it up to authorize, as it says, which grants access only to logged in users. Finally, there's authorize with roles, and the example they give there is not a great one. The example here is much better. So when you look at this says basically if you want to be able to use a shopping cart, you have to be logged in. All right. If you want to be able to work with the book controller, meaning you want to be able to add new books, modify existing books, or remove books, all right, you've got to be registered as an administrator. All right. So again, hopefully just looking at that makes sense. You can decorate like that at the whole controller level, like they do up here. You can do it at method level. All right. And really almost anything in between. And that's what they're saying in here. So to restrict access, you can apply the attributes in the authorization namespace to the entire controller or to individual methods. All right. All right. So getting started with identity, one of the things that we have to do in here, all right, some of it is pretty simplistic as far as like there's a using statement. All right, but notice what it says, how to add the identity classes to our DB context. All right, so let's take a look at what's in here and notice, all right, some of the stuff that you have to do, such as putting in this using statement right here. All right, and as you'll see, as we go into here, just a couple things, right? When we go in, we are no longer going to be, we are no longer going to be inheriting from DB context. We will be inheriting from identity DB context and the user portion of that. All right. In addition, when we go in here into our on model creating, we have to add this line before either we seed our data or we call our configuration files to seed our data. All right. And basically, that's just doing a mapping for us, for lack of better words. None of the stuff in here is changing, but what is going to change is after we do this, and then after we add a new migration for it and update the database, there will be several tables that will be added for us automatically to the database. All right, that's kind of what they're saying in here. So when we look at this as far as how to do this, it says for identity to work, you must create all the tables it needs in your database. All right, yeah, that's all fine and dandy. But to do that, basically all you have to do, again, start up the package manager, all right, and add a migration. Okay, now there's actually a little bit more to it than that. And I'm trying to look back here and see, I don't think I skipped anything, but I wanted to double check. Because when you do come in and bring this stuff in, all right, when we go into the, not to the package manager, but we'll look at this in just a bit. But when we go in, let's bring something up here. This is the one we're going to be working with. This is the start for the chapter 16 bookstore. That's at the end of the chapter. All right, and we've done this before where we've gone into NuGet, not to the console, but into here. All right, and you know what's installed here already. All right, now remember, this is the books version, so it looks a little different from some of the stuff that we've done. All right, but when we go in here and we browse, all right, there should be something in here. What is it? Is it identity? I don't remember. Let's see. Microsoft's .extensions.identity core. And it says ASP.NET Core Identity is the membership build system for building ASP.NET Core web apps, including memberships, logins, and user data. All right, so I believe we have to come in and bring that in right away. All right, now, if you look in here, I could have a problem with this. This is the books copy of this program. All right, notice that it is by default, it is coming in and trying to grab the latest and greatest, which is version 8. But if I go back and I look at what's installed, okay, you'll notice that in here, what do we have installed? It looks like the Entity Framework Core, and it's version 3.1. So if I come back in and browse to where I just was, all right, with that identity, and I try to bring that one in, I might have a problem with it. All right, I'm not going to worry about it right now. We're going to look at all of that stuff at the end of the chapter. All right. So this is what I already mentioned. Again, the using statement, changing it from the DB context, all right, to identity DB context, etc. All the stuff that's in here, and adding that change to the on model creating. All right. Okay. So as it says, for this to work, you must create all the tables. All right. And again, in the past, you had to do this much more manually than you do now. But now we can just add a migration and update the database. And it shows you on the page here, this is some of the stuff that is going to be getting, some of the tables that are going to be created for you. There will be no data in there, but there'll be the table so that you'll be able to add users, add roles, etc. And that's what they're showing in here. So as it says, for identity to work, you must create all the tables it needs in your database. All right, including the users and the roles tables. All right. As far as configuring the middleware in here, all right, as they mentioned on the next page, so let's move over to here. This starts to show you what you have to do. All right, you'll notice the directive at the top. All right, again, that's what we're going to be bringing in. All right, now it says how to add the identity service with default password options. What does that mean? That means we're going to have to bring this stuff that's in here. All right, we have to bring that into our program.cs file. All right, now when you do that and bring that in, I'm not going to read any of these, but you can see them. By default, I think that it just sets the password 6 letters, and I think it has to be alphanumeric. It might be that one of them has to be a capital letter, but that's about it. You know as well as I do, the best way to make your system more secure is to make your password bigger and bigger. So sure, you could go in there and you could double this, change the password size to 16. With what we're doing, that really doesn't pay to do something like that, but you could. All right, these I believe are going to be in there for us already. We'll take a look and see just a little bit. Oh, here you go. By default, the password must be 8 characters long with at least one lowercase, one uppercase, one number, and a special character. But again, you can change any to all of these that you might want to change. So it says once you've configured that, you can come in and start to add this. How do you do this? It's actually, it's not difficult, but it's a little quirky. All right. You'll notice here we've got a login and here we've got a log out. Well, how do you know? If the person is not logged in, this is what you want to show them. If they're already logged in, this is what you want to show them. All right. So as they mention and as they show in here, all right, you can, you come in here and you basically, this is known as injecting in here because that's what we're doing. So you can see we're injecting a sign-in manager in here, but we're checking here to see if the user is already signed in. If they are, these are going to be your links, and otherwise, these are going to be your links. All right, and you can see the difference. All right, and if you are logged in already, all right, they're kind of showing it, which is right here. So they're logged in here as Joel. So you can see that there, but you can log out with Joel and here there's just a login. All right. So as they mentioned, the layout for the bookstore app includes a bookstore or a bootstrap nav bar that includes links that let anonymous users register or log in. If the user is already logged in, it displays their name and a button that lets them log out. Pretty much what I just said. All right. All right. So it says when the browser makes a request that doesn't pass authentication, it redirects to the login by default. That's why it's common to use a controller named account with a login action method, all right, to display the login page. And that's what they show here on the next page. All right. And as you can see here, it says the URL that the MVC directs for an unauthenticated request. So in other words, if I come in here and my role is user, it's not admin, and I attempt to do an admin function, all right, Or even better, if I'm not logged in and I just have been viewing the products in the database, and now I click on go to cart or add to cart, and I'm not logged in, it's going to push me back to a login page. And that's exactly what they're saying right here. All right. So as they mentioned, you can inject the user manager, sign-in manager, role manager objects into the controller, and you'll see these a little bit later. Now, to get these to work, we have talked about this a little bit in here, to my knowledge. All right, please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't imagine that in the AWD 1111 class that you all took with Evan last summer, that you didn't talk about asynchronous methods. All right. I mean, you have to. And in with what we're doing, most of the asynchronous stuff that's in there is going to involve database operations. All right. And again, database operations can occur rather very quickly, or they can occur slowly, depending on what you're asking for. I remember years ago, one of my students graduated when I was at Blackhawk Technical College, and he got a job for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. And he was right, he loved databases, just went literally loved them. And he got a job as a database analyst. And he said, like, he told me how one of his queries was literally 11 pages long. And I marveled at that. And his name was John Sissons. And I said, John, how do you write something like that? And he just laughed. He said, very slowly. You have to write it in chunks to get everything together. He said, but what I was doing was I was going through a database that had millions of records in it, and I was looking for one or two. All right. And he said that a lot of times it did take a little bit of time for it to come back. Now, over the years, this stuff has really grown up, so to speak, and it doesn't take as much time. But you still often use asynchronous methods when you're working with this stuff, so that, as it says, it can return control to the calling code before it finishes executing, so you can go on and do something else. What that also means, as it says right there, is that you're running a multi-threaded operation rather. So not everything is going and running underneath the same thread. And that's as opposed to synchronous methods, as it says, which typically run in the same thread. And if you're doing something, you must finish it before you start something else. All right. So the next thing that's in here then is how to register a user. And as they mentioned, start to show in here. All right. To register a user, you can use a register type of page, and that's what they're showing here. Fairly simple page. You can add to this whatever you want to or need to add to this. So for instance, if you wanted to put more information in there, first name, last name, maybe they need to provide an email address and even a confirm email, etc. So this is very simplistic, but it can be much more complex than what is shown here. So if the registration here works, you get directed to the home page. All right. Otherwise, it'll display the register page again, and it'll show you whatever errors you have. All right. Now, it should make total sense to take a look at this view model that's in here and realize, well, what? First, everything that's in here is mandatory. All right, it's all required, as you can see. All right, second, with a username, they just, what they tend to do in this book is to use 255 as their default string length, which I think is a little ridiculous, but it's okay to do that. You'll also notice that in each one of these cases, since everything that's in here is of type string, we're initializing every one to string.empty. All right, and we're setting the data type for the password and the confirm password, both of them to password. All right. All right. Then next we've got the account register view. All right, what is this? Well, it's going to basically be set up as a form. all right, for you to register. So again, this is the view that goes along with what we just talked about. As it says, most of the view consists of a form that posed to the register action of the account controller. So as you can see in here, that's pretty much what it looks like. All right. All right. Now this is bringing it up. And if we go in next, we'll talk about, as it says here, the register action for post request. Now let's take a look at this page that's right here. All right. It says that the next figure on the next page, all right, shows the register action method. But first, it summarizes some of the methods and the properties the action method uses. Notice all of the methods are synchronous, so this can improve responsiveness. Now, the funny thing is, with most people, if you have to wait a second or a few seconds for something to happen, all right, with most people that, are in the business or whatever you want to call it, that's not a big thing. But again, they've done studies where with a lot of people, if you don't get some kind of a message back, within a matter of seconds, that you're just going to leave. And I don't mean you or me. I mean just Joe or Jane, average user. All right, needs to know what's going on. So it says here the register action methods shows how to work with asynchronous methods. All right. Within this method, the code starts, as it says, by checking whether the model state is valid. If it's not, it passes the view model to the account register so it can display validation methods, kind of pushes you back to where you were. If it is valid, it creates a user object and sets the username property. Then it attempts to create the user. All right. For all this to work, it says it must be preceded by the await operator. So async works with await. All right. Now, that's not new for you. That's not new for Andrew. That's not new for Chad. That's not new for James, but it is new what I'm talking about right now for Rebecca, and it's new for Lou. All right. You haven't really heard this stuff before. So most of the time, I still remember reading this thing many, many moons ago where they were talking about this stuff. And the guy was saying, when you think synchronous in an ideal world, synchronous is kind of like conversation. I sit there and start to talk. You sit and wait and listen. When I'm done, you start to talk. I sit and wait and listen, etc. And that's how it goes. With asynchronous, it's more kind of, this was the thing I was reading online that said it's kind of more like a husband and wife, where they're constantly interrupting one another, etc., and going on and doing other things. All right. The log out is probably the simplest part that's in here. All right. It's just going to be a button. You click it, boom, you're out. So if we take a look on the next page here, all right, you'll notice again, everything that's done in here is being done asynchronously. All right, whether you're creating, updating, or deleting a user. All right. Also notice the sign in and sign out, the same thing. Properties, hopefully that at least makes sense. It either worked or it didn't work. All right. And if it doesn't work, what they're showing in here is in this else statement is you can use a for each to loop through and show the user everything that was wrong. One important thing with this, and we may have talked about this before, we may not have, I don't know. But if you are asking a user to log in and you're asking them for a username and you're asking them for a password, you always want to give them a generic message right there that says problems with username and or password. You don't want to say problems with username where they might have figured out some password but don't have the username, or vice versa. All right. Again, not much really happening in here. All right. As far as logging in a user, all right, it shows it really on the next page here. And again, hopefully This is the one they have you build in here, and it's really simple. All right. Just a username and a password. Now, when you register, there's a password and there's a confirm password. But of course, when you log in, you don't have to do a confirm password. All right. Just as it says, the username and the password. And even though they use some bootstrap in here, they didn't use a lot. I mean, this isn't what I call really pretty, so to speak. All right. But it works. And I guess that the bottom line is that's the most important thing. All right. So if the user logs in successfully, the app redirects them to the page specified by the query string, where you want to tell them to go. If the user checks the remember me text box, that's when the persistent cookie is created. All right, so when you come back in again during another session. All right, so as it says here, the next figure shows the login action for GET requests. So it's displaying the account login view defined by the code that they went through on the previous page. But first, as they mentioned, it creates a login view model object and initializes the return URL property. All right. So if we take a look in here, all right, really the code in here is not all that difficult. Here's the GET. All right, here is the login view. And again, it's the form that's basically showing you when you want to go in and you want to log in. All right, now that's on the get side. Then on the post side, as they show in here, all right, and as we move up here, all right, notice another method, the password sign in async. All right, now it says identity locks out a user if the sign-in fails. And I do believe you can come out, and there are different ways that you can set that up. I know at the school I used to work at, they had it set up so that if you logged in 3 times incorrectly, you had to do one of two things. You either had to wait 20 minutes or you had to manually walk over to the IT department and say, hey, I just changed my password. I couldn't remember what it was or whatever. I do now. And then they could go in and get you in, type of an idea. All right. So this login method that's here is designed to show you how to use this. They say to start, the declaration is coded with async and it returns a task iAction result. All right. Then it starts by checking whether the model state is valid. Again, if it's not valid, all right, it's going to say invalid username / password, and it's going to push you right back again to the account login view so you can hopefully do it correctly. Once it is valid, it calls the password sign in async method. It passes the username and the password and the value of that remember me property to see whether or not it should be setting it up with a persistent cookie. All righty. Okay. Roles, again, typically what's going to happen is you're going to have some kind of an administrator go in and set up the roles. Now, they say so far you've learned how to allow a user to log in. As a result, you can restrict access to users who are logged in. However, you may also need to restrict access to users who are members of a specified role. For example, if your website has an admin area, you might want to restrict access to users who are members of the admin or manager role. And that's what this next section in here is all about. And I've used this example before, whereas as an example, all right, if I go in my inside ranking account, I can see things that you can't see in there. For instance, I can see registration information for all my students, my current students. I can go back to the last semester. I can go forward now to the next semester. You can't do that. On the other hand, if I, were to go in and talk to one of our human resources people, they can see things about both me and about other users that I can't see. All right, so we different roles, different things that different people can see. They mention here, it says, once you've created a role or two, you can use the properties and methods of the user manager class to work with users and roles. For example, you can add a user to a role or remove a user from a role. Again, hopefully, at least my hope is that makes sense. And they show you in here some examples of how that can be done. First, they talk in here, as it says, these are some of the things that you can do in the role manager class, some of the things that you can do in the user manager class. All right. And again, the keeper, so to speak, in here are going to be people with admin permission. All right. Okay. So as it says, there's how you can go in and create an admin role, delete a role. All right. Add a user role named admin and remove a user from an admin role. All right. All right. The next thing that's in here is this user entity and view model. It says now you're ready to learn how to create a manage users page like the one that's shown here. So in other words, this person is logged in and they're logged in as an administrator. Since they're logged in as an administrator, you see links that you and I cannot see as regular users. So here's where you can perform CRUD operations on the books, perform CRUD operations on the authors, perform CRUD operations on the genres, and maybe most importantly, manage users. So this is where you can come in and you can remove users if you want to, change the role of a user if you want to, delete users if you want to. All right. And they do mention here on the bottom, says the manage users page lets you do virtually everything I just mentioned. If an admin role doesn't exist, the page displays a button you can click to create it. All right. Now, when you're doing all this stuff, as they mention next, the user controller and the index action method, you know by now, or you should know how all of this stuff works together. And when you change something in one place, it'll typically necessitate you changing it someplace else. And it says here the user controller is decorated with an authorize attribute so that it only allows users of the admin role to access the page. It says typically that's what you want. However, when you're developing the page, you can comment that out. All right, that's true as long as you remember to uncomment it later. But again, they're talking about what's right in here. All right. Okay, the next thing in here is the user index view. As it says here, it begins by identifying the user view model class as the model. Then it sets the title of the page in the view bag and displays the heading for the page. And that's what's happening in the code that you see right here. All right, now if we look in here, notice if model.users count equals 0, as the message says, there are no user accounts. All right, what does that mean? It means that you just added a new group and there's nobody in it yet, or it was an existing group and everyone who was in there has been removed. All right, and they show you how you can peruse your way through here to find out who's in there, etc. Jump ahead just a little bit right there. There. All right, other action methods, as it says there for the user controller, says, for example, if you click the delete button for a user, the app calls the delete method to delete the specified user. Similarly, if you click the add to admin button, it calls that. This is one place for sure you might very well want to have checks put in there to make sure before you give someone permission, say, hey, are you sure this is what you want to do? Or if you're about to remove somebody, you say, hey, are you sure this is what you want to do? Type of an idea. All right. On the bottom, it says, as you review these methods, you should realize that the ones with admin in their names are hard-coded to work with a role named admin. All right. You don't have to use those names, but it's just so commonplace to do that. All right. Now, code that restricts access, we talked a little bit about this before. So in other words, if I go in and try to do some kind of an administrative action and I'm not logged in as an administrator, either I'm not logged in at all, or I'm logged in as a quote, just typical generic user, unquote. All right. So as it says, this shows the code that restricts access to some of the pages of the website. All right. And you'll notice in here, they even mention, again, we're talking about using the decoration. All right. And this is what happens. And you're going to see that after the break. So as mentioned right there, if you're not logged in and you attempt to access cart or admin pages, you get sent to the login page. If you're logged in as a user, you can go to the cart page. If you're logged in as a user that's an admin role, all right, you can access the admin pages. Otherwise, you're going to get this access denied. Okay, and again, hopefully that just makes sense. All right. Next, they talk about seeding roles. All right. So in other words, we want to give some initial roles, some initial users. What do you have to do? All right. And they do mention here down on the bottom, says, as you review the code, note it only creates one role named admin and one user with a name of admin and a password, which is stupid, but you get the idea. That's what they actually use in their example in here. All right. So as the author mentions, if you need to seed the database with initial roles and users, you can use a method like this to do it, like they show right here. Now, when you do this, believe it or not, they're going to ask us to come in and do a lot of the work that's on this page here on 693 when we get back from the break. All right, they're going to ask us to create this create admin user async method. This is the one that I did not have that I had to get from Evan. All right, a couple more skills as mentioned here for working with identity. Now, when they talk about changing a user's password, typically this is going to be predicated by what kind of uh, authorization basically you have as a as an administrator. And what I mean is, as an example, where I used to work, if I forgot my password, all right, and they couldn't, I could call IT. They could not tell me what it was, but they could reset my password to password and have a thing there where immediately I'd have to change it. All right, that's usually the way that this works. All right. So here's the change password right here. Hopefully you can tell by taking a look at it that the username is grayed out, meaning that would make no sense to be able to change that. And in order to do this, you'll have to put in an old password, all right, or the current password. All right. Now, where many years ago, back in the 80s, where I used to work, this was unbelievably important because when we got up into our laboratory, when we were testing our code, we were sharing the same machine. And one time I was in there, no excuse, but I was in there, I worked a midnight to 4 shift, and I accidentally left myself logged in. You never want to do that. And fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, the person who found out all this stuff about me was kind of a jerk and literally went into my profile, logged me out, but before they did, they went into my profile. So it came up with an encrypted message about every, I think it was about every 10 minutes. And it said, only a-holes don't log out of lab machines, and it would keep coming up as I was working on things. So the next day I saw that for a few hours. Then after lunch, I got an email, an anonymous email that said, don't worry, it's gone now. Don't do that again. All right. Not maybe as big a thing, with what we're doing because we're the only one using it. But again, when you are working in some kind of a setup where you've got multiple people sharing the same machines, can be important. All right. And finally, how to add more user registration fields. This is what I mentioned before. If you want, all right. So they're assuming that the things that are here in Mustard, you're adding a first name, you're adding a last name, and you're adding an email address. And in fact, they're going to ask us to do that. So what I would like to do is take a look at exercise 16.1 and go through it. Now, before we do, we'll take a break. But before we do that, all right, I believe that if you go into the information that you got sent at the beginning of the semester, all right, that you should have, I'll just show it to you. It's much easier. So for me, for example, it's C:\\/Muroc \\core MVC new. All right. This is what I sent you guys at the beginning of the semester. Now yours probably doesn't say new on it. That's okay. But when you come here and you go to student download and you go to EX starts, that's where I'd like everybody to go and open up the chapter 16 EX bookstore. All right. Now I want to show you what I had and what Evan sent me, because I'm going to send this to you during the break. All right. If you go in here, one of the things they expect is if I open this folder up, the bookstore folder, and I open up the models folder, and I open up the data layer folder, it's expecting that there's a folder in there in what I just showed you that's called configuration. I don't have that. Now, maybe you do, but I don't. So what I'm going to do during the break is I'm going to send you that configuration folder. And the reason I'm going to do that is because part of what we're supposed to do in this exercise depends on you doing that. So let's see. Not it. There it is. Evan sent me this right before we started class today. So what I will do during the break is I will just send it out to all of you. I might as well just do it right now. All right, so I'll send it out right now. I've got it here, configuration.zip. All right, so you will get it. It is 12:59. Let's come back at 1:15. We'll go through this exercise. I'm sorry, but that's about all I've got in me for today. All right, so I'll see you at 1:15. All right. It's 1:15. So before we start, tomorrow, the plan then is we did this program together, I believe, a while back, program 11.1, Build the Quarterly Sales app. All right. So I'm going to give you all a working copy of that, just in case you don't have it. All right, which means I better get my butt in gear to make sure that I've graded everybody's to see if they did put it in or did not put it in. But then what we will do tomorrow, keep going, there we go, is add authorization to this. So as it says in this project, you'll update the quarterly sales app from 11.1 or project 13.1 to use authentication and authorization. So we will add that. All right, not a whole heck of a lot that we're doing. And that's actually the last one that's in here. All right, I am still going to ask that all of you try to do 16.1, which is at the end here. This is the last one. You don't have to do 15, but to try to do 16 for the Sports Pro case study. We'd already gone through 12. We're not doing 14, which is on testing. We're not doing 15, but I'm going to ask that you try to do 16. And 16, as it says here, is the authenticate and authorize users. Okay. All right. So let's get back into here. Now, as mentioned previously, all right, in my data layer, and you may have brought yours up, you may not have, I don't know. But in my data layer folder in here, there's 27 things you're supposed to do in exercise 16.1. Number 16 says in the models data layer configuration folder. Well, I'm in models data layer and I didn't get any configuration folder. That's why I asked Evan for his. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the project up here. All right, so I'm going to bring it up. And I've got it here in a folder. I had it in a folder here called Start, which I don't know what I did. There it is. All right, so there it is. And again, if I go into bookstore, models, data layer, there is no configuration folder in there. So I'm going to add that in. If you already have it, great. All right, but in my data layer here, I'm going to right mouse click and I'm going to say, maybe it'll work better like this. I'm going to add a new folder that I'm going to call configuration. All right. Then I'm going to right mouse click on that new folder and add existing item. I'm going to go back to my desktop, find that configuration folder. I know you're in here. Well, maybe I have to I thought I extracted it, but maybe I didn't. All right. Open it up. Grab all these files that are in it and click add. So now I've got those in there. If you already had them, great, but I did not. All right. So with all that said, I'm just going to follow the steps that are in the book. So number 1 says, open the project. Fine, we've done that. Number 2 says, in the shared folder, under views shared, open up the underscore layout.cs HTML folder. And they're saying to do that because they want to show you that in here, they've injected the sign-in manager and they've used an @if statement to say, again, if the user is signed in already, you should have their name, all right, and a log out button. But if they have not yet signed in, all right, we should push them basically over to the register page. So again, as you see, if I come in here right now and run this, oh, fantastic. Wonder if that's what I just added. Book does not contain a definition for authors. Configuration for book authors. Okay, let's look at that. Well, I'll have to look at that in just a bit, but that's in one of those files that's in there. So I don't know if that'll fix it or make it worse, but we'll find out. I'm going to take this whole thing, this whole configure that's in here, and just comment the whole thing out. And hopefully that'll, great. Oh, my goodness. Well, want everything commented out, maybe. No more I can comment out than that. There. Okay. So let's see if I can bring it up now. This is a configuration file, so it may screw something up down the road later. I don't know. Yeah, it's already giving me errors. Cannot open book. Okay, that's fine. Cannot open database bookstore requested by login. Do I have a bookstore database? I thought I did. or Object Explorer. I do not, so I have removed it. All right, so I'm going to come in and I'm going to go into the package manager. I'm gonna have to do this a couple times, but that's fine. And I'm going to go to the console and just say to update the database. See if we can build it that way. Do you want to stop debugging? Yeah, I better. All right, it says the database is up to date, so let's make sure it was built. And there's bookstore. Okay, but you'll notice that right now it has just in it authors, books, and genres. It does not have any of the authentication and authorization stuff in it. We're going to try to fix that in just a minute. All right. So in the domain models folder, all right, open the user entity class. And you will notice that when you look at this user entity class, it inherits the identity user class up here. And it adds a roles name property that isn't mapped to the database. All right. In the view models folder, open the register view model and the login view model. So let's just do them one at a time. So here's the register view model right here. All they're saying basically is note that it has some of the attributes that we talked about in an earlier chapter in it, such as every field is required. We've got a string length in there as well. All right. And if we go to the other one, which is the login view model, much more the same, except the only thing that's required in there is a username and a password. All right. The return URL and the remember me are not required. Okay. Number 5, in the controllers folder, open up the account controller class. And it says, note that this brings in the user manager and the sign-in manager classes by dependency injection. All right. And it utilizes them down here. And it utilizes them with async and await. So we haven't been asked to do anything really yet. It's just, they're just showing you a few of the things that are in here. All right. Next, open up the controllers, open up the cart controller, and notice that it's got authorize at the top, which means that you've got to be logged in order to be able to use it. Okay, nothing new there. In the areas admin controller right here, open the book controller. Note that it's decorated with the authorized attribute and it shows the admin role right here. Okay, so step 8, in the models data layer, open the bookstore context file. Close some of this stuff so it's a little easier to see. There we go. All right, so open up the, where am I? In the models data layer folder, open up the book context file. All right, data layer. Those are the configure. There it is. Okay. Update it to inherit from identity DB context. Plus, we'll need to put user here. And in order to do that, I think we're going to have to bring in a different using statement. Okay, so that fixed all that. So we added this, changed that from DB context with nothing after it to identity DB context user. Then we have to come in, and for some reason I've already got it here. But if you don't have that there, the base dot on model creating model builder, go in and add that. Now it says we can do the add migration. Well, that's fine and dandy, but I want to go back to this file. Let me close a bunch of this stuff here.
What was that line that you put at the top of this file again? Where you,
It's the
identity.
using or the other one?
That one, the
This
identity
is
context. Thank
okay.
you.
All righty. And in this configure book author, this was silly to go in and comment all this stuff out. So I want to uncomment it and see how I get it to work. All right, now it gave me an error before, and it didn't like this with many books. It says entity type book does not contain a definition for with many, and no acceptable extension method with many. Accepting the first argument of that type could be found. Are you missing a directive, or is oh, it's not giving me any hints here. I was hoping it would. Let's see. Does not like this. Well, I got to undo that too. All right. It says does not have the property authors, and I want to check. Well, let's go look in here. So let's see. It has it right there. That's fantastic. For now, I'm just going to leave that and hope we can figure it out later. All right. So we did step 8. Step 9, we'd already actually done that and brought up the package manager console. So, and we did the update database. Now, the problem is in step 11, it says to run it and is not going to work. Doggone it. didn't do what I thought it would do. I mean, what they're saying here makes sense because one book could have many authors, and it's trying to show a many to many relationship. Mm. Well, I didn't think I'd be getting errors in their code. Darn it. Shows it there. Son of a gun. Yeah, because the next step here, well, I don't think that's gonna help, but let's try this. Build. Rebuilding the solution isn't gonna do diddly. Well, I'm not gonna keep you here while I fumble my way through this, so I'm gonna look at this right now. If I find a fix, I'll send it to everybody and we'll start this here tomorrow. And then we're gonna go over the chapter 16, the example I mentioned to you before. That is the here, this one, the add authorization to the quarterly sales app. This one we're definitely going to do tomorrow. I don't have this finished, but I almost do, and I don't have any errors in it right now. But we'll finish the other one tomorrow. I apologize. I don't know what the heck the problem is. All right, I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you. See you tomorrow.